Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. My guest today is Terje Rød-Larsen. He is the president of the International Peace Institute. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Mr. Rød-Larsen, you've worked a lot on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, what came to be known as the Oslo process. Obviously, it is in dire straits. Some people say the peace process is actually dead. There's a lot of talk about Donald Trump's so-called deal of the century. How do you view this Israeli-Palestinian file nowadays?
Let me first comment on Oslo. The Oslo agreements are basically the following. It's an ideology. It's the idea of the two-state solution as the only viable solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And then secondly, it is a set of institutions, which is the Palestinian Authority, the presidency, the various ministries, etc., etc. So that's the institutional element in it. And then thirdly, it is the mutual recognition of Israel and the Palestinians, where Israel recognized the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, and whereby the PLO recognized the state of Israel. All this stands, but then there is another element, and that's the peace process, because what the Oslo Agreement envisaged was a peace process which should last for 5 years and should then resolve the so-called final status issues, which is the issue of Jerusalem, which was envisioned by many at the time to be the capital of two states, the state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital and West Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. And then it's also the issue of return of refugees, and it's the issue of where the borders should be, and it's the issue of security. This is now 25 years ago, and one of the reasons why the Oslo process didn't succeed within the envisaged time frame is that the Israeli government predominantly, but also the Israelis, deviated for the criteria of the Oslo Agreement. And this has displayed one fundamental flaw in the agreement, namely that there was no monitoring mechanism where the parties could be held accountable for not implementing what they had signed on.
Right. I mean, you're saying the Israelis are mostly to blame for the failure to make this agreement a reality on the ground?
I mean, both parties have deviated on many accounts to the agreement. And over the last few years, over the last several years, there hasn't actually been a peace process because the parties have never for real met at the table trying to resolve the issues, which means that the Oslo peace process, where implementation started in earnest after 1994 for several years, the last attempt, the so-called Hebron Agreement, which was consistent with Oslo, but after that, by and large, there's been a deviation from the guidelines of
mostly
Oslo.
By Israel?
By both parties, but it is the Israelis over the last few years who has actually refused to go to the table. And if you don't go to the table, you can't address the issues. If you go to the table, you can address the issues. And of course, Israel's move, the American move of the embassy, the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, in a way, had an effect that it wasn't so that the issue was taken off the table, but the table was taken out of the room.
Right.
Which means that now the Palestinians don't want to go to the table because of this. So
the peace process is dead.
So, I mean, the peace process over the last few years has had nothing with the Oslo process to do, but there was a peace process, but now there isn't a peace process. So, and of course now there is a US attempt to put the peace process back again.
Is it really a US attempt? Because the Palestinians saying it's dead on arrival, it's not an attempt, they're just fooling with us.
I think the intent is good and for real. The last initiative being to have an economic workshop in the country of Bahrain.
Is it a good initiative? The Palestinians are furious about this.
I mean, I haven't read the proposals. I can't possibly comment on it. But what I've seen from media interviews, etc., is that it's only the economic issues without the political parameters to be addressed. This has been tried many, many times before under a slogan, namely economic peace, and it has every time turned out that it doesn't work. So in a way, this is nothing new. It's inventing a wheel which has been invented many times before. And
but it's a recipe for failure.
It has proved to be a wheel which doesn't function. But if there is a willingness to put the political framework around discussing the economic issues, definitely the Palestinians who should seriously consider participating in it. They don't have to agree what is put on the table, but they can look at it and then they can say we disagree or we agree on something.
So you would encourage them to take a look?
Because yeah, but I do fully understand that it's very difficult for them to do it without having a discussion of the political parameters, because then it will be a kind of political suicide, because then it will look as if the Palestinians are selling their identity as citizens of a future state. So unless you understand that for the Palestinians, the political issue is not an economic issue, it's an issue of identity, and Palestinian identity is glued to the notion of the establishment of a Palestinian state.
Right, but there's now talk by the Palestinians of cutting off security cooperation with Israel, even of withdrawing the recognition that you mentioned earlier. Are you afraid that the institutions that were built that are very frail could actually collapse in the near future?
I mean, these notions and opinions have come up very regularly from the Palestinian side over the last 10 years, and it's never come to fruition.
So you don't really believe they'll do it?
I mean, for paradoxically, even if I fully understand the pain on the Palestinian side, paradoxically, if they dismantle the Palestinian Authority, as they say, go and give the keys to the government buildings to the Israeli Prime Minister, I mean, then they will have to go in exile again. And they have to go back to where they were before the Oslo Accords. They were branded as a terrorist organization, and they were in exile in Tunis. There were very little funds coming in.
So they don't really have a choice, that's what you're saying?
I mean, they have a choice, but I think the situation will be much worse for them if they abandon the Palestinian, the structures of the Palestinian Authority and the ideology of the two-state solution.
So you think a two-state solution is still possible? The American ambassador to Israel recently in an interview said, you know, Israel could annex parts of the West Bank. I mean, this would seem like it's the burial of the two-state solution if this happens.
I think here...
And it's not an Israeli official, it's an American official supposed to mediate.
To use a Scandinavian metaphor, I think they're skating on very thin ice here, because if Israel takes control over the West Bank, maybe also of Gaza again, who knows, then they will have the full legal, social and economic responsibility for those areas. Hospitals, social services, security, infrastructure, livelihood, employment, etc. And I think that would be an absolute nightmare for Israel. So I think this will be a lose-lose situation. It will be very bad for the Palestinians, and it will be very bad for the Israelis.
Right. Just very last question. Do you think the turning point was at the very end of the Clinton administration, 2000, when there were those negotiations that nearly bore fruit. Do you think this was really when peace was the closest, or do you believe this is maybe...
I think it's been very close, actually, many times. This was where the so-called, in the Clinton era, the so-called Camp David negotiations. When they collapsed, it was picked up again immediately afterwards through the so-called Taba negotiations in Taba, and they came extremely close to fruition. And also during Prime Minister Olmert, they again came very, very close. And so what I would have done is that I would have taken one of those deals, even if they were not wholly satisfactory, and
continued. Speaking of the Palestinians.
Yes, and then continued to negotiate on that basis. That was the roadmap for peace, which suggested the establishment of a Palestinian state with provisional borders, and then one could have negotiated
so Arafat
for permanent
made a
borders.
mistake.
I think the Palestinian leadership did a mistake by not going for one of those deals, basically saying, okay, we will take this, but we will continue to negotiate to try to improve our position. But anyhow, this is history and counterfactual reasoning, which is not good history science. But anyhow.
Okay, Terje Rød-Larsen, thank you very much for coming on the France 24 set. And thank you for watching this interview from The Hague in the Netherlands.
Fake news. Noun. False stories that appear to be news, spread on the internet or using other media. At France 24, our job is to provide you with information that's been verified. We check sources, we check facts, we sort what is true from what is fake.
At the France 24 Observers, we verify photos and videos circulating online. If they're fake, we let you know and tell you how we spotted them.
In Fact or Fake, we dig into viral stories around Europe to shake out the truth from the trash.
Every day on Info Migrants' website, we fight fake news spread on social networks about the reality of migration.
France 24, news based on facts.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.